ودمهم دمي يؤلمني ما يؤلمهم ويحزنني ما يحزنهم أنا حرب لمن حاربهم وسلم لمن سالمهم وعدو لمن عاداهم ومحب لمن أحبهم إنهم مني وأنا منهم فضل صلواتك وبركاتك ورحمتك وغفرانك ورضوانك علي وعليهم وأجب عنكم الرجس وطهركم تطهيرا اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد فقال الله عز وجل يا ملائكتي ويا سكان سماواتي إني ما خلقت سماء مبنية ولا أرضا مدية ولا قمرا منيرا ولا شمسا مضية ولا فلكا يدور ولا بحرا يجري ولا فلكا يسري إلا في محبة هؤلاء الخمسة الذين هم تحت الكساء اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد فقال الأمين جبريل يا رب ومن تحت الكساء فقال عز وجل هم أهل بيت النبوة ومعدن رسالتهم فاطمة وأبوها وبعلها وبنوها اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد فقال جبريل يا ربي أتأذن لي نحبتي للأرض لأكون معهم سادسا فقال الله نعم قد أذنت لك فهبط الأمين جبريل وقال السلام عليك يا رسول الله العلي الأعلى يقرئك السلام ويقصك بالتحية والإكرام ويقول لك وعزتي وجلالي إني ما خلقت سماء مبنية ولا أرضا مدية ولا قمرا منيرا ولا شمسا مضية ولا فلكا يدور ولا بحرا يجري ولا فلكا يسري إلا لأجلكم ومحبتكم وقد أذنوا لي أن أدخل معكم فهل تأذنوا لي يا رسول الله فقال رسول الله وعليك السلام يا أمين وهي الله إنه نم أذنت لك فدخل جبريل معنا تحت الكساء اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد فقال لأبي إن الله قد أوحى إليكم يقول إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا اللهم صل على محمد وآل فقال علي لأبي يا رسول الله أخبر ما لجلوسنا هذا تحت الكساء من الفضل عند الله فقال النبي والذي بعثني بالحق نبيا واصطفاني برسالة نزيا ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافله أهل الأرض وفيه جمع من شيعتنا ومحبينا إلا ونزلت عليهم الرحمة وحفت بهم الملائكة واستغفرت لهم إلى أن يتفرقوا فقال علي إذن والله فزنا وفاز شيعتنا ورب الكعبة فقال النبي ثانيا يا علي والذي بعثني بالحق نبيا واصطفاني برسالة نزيا ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافله أهل الأرض وفيه جمع من شيعتنا ومحبينا وفيهم مهموم الله وفرج الله همه ولا مغموم الله وكشف الله غمه ولا طالب حاجة إلا وقضى الله حاجته فقال علي إذن والله فزنا وسعيدنا وكذلك شيعتنا فازوا وسعدوا في الدنيا والآخرة ورب الكعبة اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Let's recite one Surah Fatiha for all the marumin. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد
صلوات صلی علی محمد و آل محمد. کیا دیکھتی ہے سغرا زینب کے آنسوؤں میں، کیا دیکھتی ہے سغرا زینب کے آنسوؤں میں، منظر ہے کربلا کا زینب کے آنسوؤں میں، برچھی کا زخم تازہ تا زندگی رہے گا، برچھی کا زخم تازہ تا زندگی رہے گا، اکبر کا ہے کلیجہ زینب کے آنسوؤں میں، سغرا نظر اٹھاؤ قاسم کا حال دیکھو، سغرا نظر اٹھاؤ قاسم کا حال دیکھو، بکھرا ہوا ہے لاشا زینب کے آنسوؤں میں، بکھرا ہوا ہے لاشا زینب کے آنسوؤں میں، اے دیدائے تصور تجھ کو دکھائی دے گا، اے دیدائے تصور تجھ کو دکھائی دے گا، چھوٹا سا ایک جھولا زینب کے آنسوؤں میں، چھوٹا سا ایک جھولا زینب کے آنسوؤں میں، زندان شام میں ہے چھوٹی سی قبر لیکن، زندان شام میں ہے چھوٹی سی قبر لیکن، موجود ہے سکینہ زینب کے آنسوؤں میں، موجود ہے سکینہ زینب کے آنسوؤں میں، شبیر پیش داور جائیں گے ساتھ لے کر، شبیر پیش داور جائیں گے ساتھ لے کر، بھیگا ہوا امامہ زینب کے آنسوؤں میں، کیا دیکھتی ہے سغرا زینب کے آنسوؤں میں، بے پردگی کا عالم کیسے عدیل لکھے، خود دیکھ لے زمانہ زینب کے آنسوؤں میں، عباس کے بریدہ ہاتھوں کی داستان ہے، عباس کے بریدہ ہاتھوں کی داستان ہے، بہتا ہے غم کا دریا زینب کی آنسوؤں میں، زندان شام میں ہے چھوٹی سی قبر لیکن موجود ہے سکینہ زینب کے آنسوؤں میں، اکبر اور محمد بھی یاد آ رہے ہیں، ہونے لگا اضافہ زینب کی آنسوؤں میں، کیا دیکھتی ہے صغرا زینب کے آنسوؤں میں، ظلم و ستم کا منظر سب دیکھ لے مدینہ، ظلم و ستم کا منظر سب دیکھ لے مدینہ، ہے شام اور کوفہ زینب کے آنسوؤں میں، کیا دیکھتی ہے صغرا زینب کے آنسوؤں میں، منظر ہے کربلا کا زینب کے آنسوؤں میں۔
صلوات بار دیگر صلوات۔ یہ کون سی مستور ہے کیا مانگ رہی ہے، یہ کون سی مستور ہے کیا مانگ رہی ہے، اسلام کی خدمت کا صلہ مانگ رہی ہے، ہر صاحب غیرت سے ردا مانگ رہی ہے، پردیس میں مرنے کی دعا مانگ رہی ہے، افسردہ ہیں افلاک سے آپوش زمیں ہے، جبریل یہ دیکھو کہیں زینب تو نہیں ہے، یہ کون سی مستور ہے کیا مانگ رہی ہے، صلوات۔ فاتحہ۔ سجاد جب دوبارہ اسیر جفا ہوئے، سجاد جب دوبارہ اسیر جفا ہوئے زنجیر اور طوق میں پھر مبتلا ہوئے روح رسول پاک کو صدمے سوا ہوئے درد و علم بطول کو لا انتہا ہوئے درد و علم بطول کو لا انتہا ہوئے غل تھا کہ پھر مدینے کی بستی اجڑتی ہے گردن میں توق پاؤں میں زنجیر پڑتی ہے گردن میں توق پاؤں میں زنجیر پڑتی ہے روئے پھوپھی کو دیکھ کے عابد بحال زا اتنے میں حکم پا کے چلی فوج نابکا آگے تو قید جاتے تھے سجاد نامدار تھا ان کے پیچھے ناقہ زینب جگر فگار تھا ان کے پیچھے ناقہ زینب جگر فگار اٹھا تھا دل میں درد قدم تھر تھراتے تھے محمل کو دیکھ دیکھ کے آنسو بہاتے تھے محمل کو دیکھ دیکھ کے آنسو بہاتے تھے الکے سجیس گھڑی کے نمایاں ہوئی سحر لشکر ہوا یزید کا آمادہ سفر اٹھی وضو کو خواہر سلطان بحر و فضا نے نماز بچھائی بچشم تر فضا نے جان نماز بچھائی بچشم تر ایک دام ملول سیوا ہوتی جاتی تھی زینب نماز پڑھتی تھی اور روتی جاتی تھی زینب نماز پڑھتی تھی اور روتی جاتی تھی فارغ ہوئی دعا سے جو زینب بچشم تر فضا کو تب بلا کہ یہ بولی وہ نوحگر یہاں سے بہت قریب ہے سنتی ہوں وہ شجر خولی نے جس درخت میں باندھا تھا شے کا سر خولی نے جس درخت میں باندھا تھا شے کا سر لے چل وہاں پہ فاطمہ زہرا کی جائی کو روں گی اس درخت کے نیچے میں بھائی کو روں گی اس درخت کے نیچے میں بھائی کو اٹھ کر قرین شجر کے جو پہنچی کشاں کشاں بے اختیار آنکھوں سے آنسو ہوئے رواں آیا نظر جو خون شہنشاہ ناگہاں لپٹی شجر سے خار سلطان انس و جان لپٹی شجر سے خار سلطان انس و جان چلاتی تھی کہ جان حزین نکلی جاتی ہے بھیا تمہارے خون کی بو مجھ کو آتی ہے بھیا تمہارے خون کی بو مجھ کو آتی پوچھا یہ اس نے آ کہ قریب سپاہ عورت یہ کون سی ہے جو روتی ہے اس قدر بولا کوئی شقی کہ تجھے کیا نہیں خبر زینب یہی ہے عاشق سلطان بہروبہ زینب یہی ہے عاشق سلطان بہروبہ مدت سے سوگوار شہ تشنہ کام ہے یہ خواہر حسین علیہ السلام ہے یہ خواہر حسین علیہ السلام سننا تھا یہ کہ غیظ میں آیا وہ بازباں پہنچا قریب دو کر خاتون انس و جاں تھا آہنی جو ہاتھ میں ایک بیلچہ گرا مارا شقی نے فرق پہ زینب کے ناگہاں مارا شقی نے فرق پہ زینب کے ناگہاں غش آ گیا زمین پہ تھرا کے گر پڑی سر پر لگی وہ ضرب کے تیوڑا کے گر پڑی سر پر لگی وہ ضرب کے تیوڑا کے گر پڑی سجاد جب دوبارہ سلام
Inshallah, as a reminder for the programming this week, we'll have Majalis again on Friday night and Saturday night, beginning at 7:45 p.m. with Salatul Isha. And as a reminder, on Saturday at 10 a.m., there will be a career panel event and networking event that is primarily geared towards high school students, college students, and young professionals. So we ask you guys to invite your children or your friends, anyone who you think may benefit. We'll have professionals from 17 panelists from all various professions represented at this event. So inshallah, it'll be a big blessing and benefit to the community members. With that, I have a brief speaker bio for our speaker for this evening, though he may need no introduction. Maulana Sayyid Sulayman Hasan, upon graduating from the University of Buffalo, proceeded to the Islamic Seminary of Qom, where he was privileged to study under world-renowned scholars specializing in Islamic law, history, and Arabic literature. He served as a researcher with the Ahlul Bayt Institute, which is affiliated with the Office of Ayatollah Sistani, and he was a fellow at the Zikr Institute for Advanced Legal Studies. Since returning to the United States, Sayyid Sulayman has served as religious director at the Baitul Ilm Academy and as the president of the Ahlul Bayt Islamic Seminary in Illinois. During this time, he also attended the University of Chicago and obtained a PhD in Near Eastern Studies. He currently serves as the president and religious director of Imam Asr Islamic Seminary in Virginia. He lectures widely in academic and masjid settings and actively participates in interfaith and intrafaith outreach. He serves on the board of directors and is a senior faculty member of the Mufid Academic Seminary, which is a pioneering and innovative program whose mission is to train the next generation of leading Shia scholars, both in the Western academia and qualified imams for the Islamic centers throughout North America. So we are honored to have Sayyid Sulayman Hasan as the speaker for this evening. And with that, I'd like to request Maulana to take the minbar and deliver the majlis for this evening. Please recite aloud salawat.
Surah Al-Fatiha. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين المبعوث رحمة للعالمين شفيع المذنبين وحبيب قلوب الصادقين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي يسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، فقد قال الله عز وجل في القرآن المجيد والفرقان الحميد وهو أصدق القائلين: يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن الذين آمنوا والذين هاجروا وجاهدوا في سبيل الله أولئك يرجون رحمة الله والله غفور رحيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The journey from Washington to Boston is not normally a very long journey. Unfortunately, today, due to weather here in Boston, a flight which was supposed to depart at 10:30 ended up departing after 5 p.m. And so I came straight from the airport to the center. But it is an honor and a privilege to be in your presence. And we are here to remember our ideals and those personalities who give our life its meaning and its value. And so, on the basis not of any leftover energy that I have today, but on the basis of your sincerity in conducting and in attending this majlis, and with the assistance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and our Imams, for whom these gatherings of remembrance are held, I pray inshallah that I will be able to convey the message that I would like to convey effectively. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Once again, I will recite the verse which I intended to recite at the beginning of this majlis. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Innal ladhina amanu wal ladhina hajaru wa jahadu fi sabilillah ulaika yarjuna rahmatallah wallahu ghafurur rahim. This is a verse of Surah Al-Baqarah, verse number 218. In which Allah gives a message about who it is that is able to have hope in the mercy of Allah. And this message is important for us for a number of reasons. One is that we live in a time when people have lost hope. And it is ironic and very tragic that sometimes the people who have the most are the people who are the most hopeless. If you go to people who are healthy, intelligent, educated, wealthy, then in many cases, if you say, what is the purpose of your life? They won't have an answer. Or the answer will be something that does not have a great deal of depth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not created our religion to be a series of laws that we learn only through revelation. Our religion is part of our existence and the very fibers of our being. And so even an atheist is religious because they cannot go against the very nature of their existence. Now, don't go to an atheist and say, you just think you don't believe in God, you believe in God. And you are religious. They won't like that, and it isn't respectful. But just as they can sometimes believe that those of us who are religious are clinging to our traditions or our identities for economic reasons or for social reasons or for political reasons or other reasons, and there is no embarrassment and no restriction on their having their own understanding and analysis of why people believe in religion, we should not be embarrassed or defensive in having our understanding of why somebody may not believe in religion. If they come to me and say that you are only religious because you come from a formerly colonized people, or it is an ethnic identity, then that is arrogant. But whether it be scholars or politicians, President Obama famously gave a similar kind of cultural and economic analysis of why people have a certain affiliation with their traditional values and religion. And that is their right. Similarly, it is our prerogative to say that we have an understanding of why somebody may not believe in religion. And so not in any kind of arrogant way, and not to tell somebody that I know them better than they know themselves, but to say that I have my understanding of the essence of religion. And based on my understanding of what the essence of religion is there is a reason why somebody may reject religion. This is my analysis of the reality of existence based on the fact that I believe in God. And my belief in God is not a God who created the world and then sat back and said, you figure it out on your own. Or programmed the world and then the program operates on its own. Or who dispensed the world to somebody else to run. But rather, a creator and a Lord who is present in every action, every decision, every movement, and everything that takes place anywhere within the world or within the universe. Based on that understanding of who God is and God's immanence and his presence in managing the affairs of all of creation, we believe that he has placed our religion within our very essence. That is the key point. So 80% or 70% of religion does not need revelation. It simply needs a person to have some connection with their fitrah. Some connection, and fitrah comes from the Arabic word fatara, which means to create, to originate, to initiate. So fitrah is khilqah, meaning your existence, your creation, your being. If a person has some connection with their essence and with their being, then they are religious even if they don't know it. And even if they don't like it. And even if they will deny it. So, an atheist will have purpose in their life because that purpose, it comes from within our very existence. But because they may not recognize it and they may not admit it, it won't be very well thought out and deeply held in most cases. So if somebody says that, well, my purpose in life is to seek beauty. There are many people who have a hobby or a passion, they are seeking something beautiful. That is a purpose. And in reality, it isn't a shallow purpose. It becomes shallow if the thing that I seek beauty in is only an imperfect reflection of what is truly beautiful. So for example, imagine that I create a virtual world, and those of us who remember when computers first came out, I was in high school when they upgraded our computer monitors from what was known as CGA to EGA. And as a teenager, it was very impressive. Now, you can see maybe 12 lines of text. And if you don't look too closely, it actually looks like text. And rather than just 4 colors, which aren't really distinct colors, but were different shades, you now had 16 colors that you could see on a monitor. And people would come and they would look at those new monitors and say, wow, what won't they think up next? You can see a picture and you can actually recognize the landscape. Now, we have much more technology, and who knows what kinds of developments lie in the future where we will see not just the detail and multiple dimensions, and maybe also have the aroma of what we are seeing and many other kinds of technological advancements. So now imagine that you have a very well-designed and sophisticated virtual reality that can give you an image of nature that is beautiful. but it can't compare to the real thing. And if you go to the actual place that God has created, which that image is based on, even if now it's not 16 colors, but it's millions of colors. And even if it's not the primitive 3D, but something much more sophisticated, it will still be a fake, an artificial, a virtual rendition of something that is far more beautiful in reality. And all of us can appreciate that, in spite of the technology that has come. But what we don't always appreciate is even that nature is an imperfect rendition of the source of that beauty. And it is far more imperfect than that CGA monitor was, or even than that monochrome monitor was, with just two colors, either a pixel of light or darkness. Imagine if you take a picture of a beautiful scene in nature and then you display it on a monochrome monitor. You're going to see that it's wasted. And if somebody looks at it and says, wow, that's very intricate, you'll say you have no idea what you're talking about. Because this is not even a good image, let alone the reality. But if we are comparing the beauty of that monochrome, imperfect image of a physical reality is closer to the truth than even the intricacy and the beauty of existence is to the source of that beauty, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So to devote yourself to beauty, whether you are a believer or an agnostic or an atheist, doesn't make a difference. To devote yourself to beauty is not wrong. That comes from within your fitrah. But then it becomes shallow if I think that beauty is going to come through my art, or through my architecture, or through an appreciation for the geniuses of artistic history and their creations and their masterpieces. That's just a monochrome monitor. It's a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy that was then printed and got left in somebody's pocket and went through the washer and the dryer and came out and was shredded and put back together. That is the masterpiece that people go to museums and then look at and say, what is it that I am looking at and how did the person create it? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Our Prophet Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says, Inna Allaha jameel yuhibbul jamal. Allah is not just beautiful, but the source of all beauty. And therefore, He loves it when human beings live with and create and seek beauty in their lives. So, a non-believer will also be drawn towards what is beautiful. They might not know what is that true beauty. And so they might seek to beautify their own face through cosmetics, through plastic surgery, through airbrushing their pictures so that if they can't look good in real life, at least they'll look good on the screen, or through other material means, because that's the limit of their sight. But the impulse, and it's not even an impulse, that desire within is a godly desire if it is directed in the right way. So the reason why I gave that example, and we can say the same thing about anything else that people want, even when people want to accumulate wealth, alhaakumut takathur. Many people, when their home value was going up, they feel wealthy. They're living in the house. They're not even renting out a room. The only thing they're getting from that appreciating home value is higher taxes and insurance. They're not benefiting in any material way because they're not taking out an equity loan, they're not selling, they're not renting, but now they feel good. I'm wealthy. And then the housing market crashes, and all of a sudden I'm stressed. Are you selling? No. Are you planning on moving in the near future? No. But I feel poor. This is something that many of us may have experienced or we may have witnessed. And it can be with our house, it can be with our investments, it can be with anything in this material world. Both the happiness is fake and the sadness is misplaced. But even that desire, which becomes a source of lahu, alhaakumut takathur, even that comes from a godly place. And if it didn't come from the godly origin, then Allah would not say fastabiqul khairat. Compete with each other. But don't compete with each other to say that I have the bigger house or the better car, or I was able to put on the fancier party, or my majlis had more people, or whatever it is that people compete for in this world, or even when they compete for the superficial aspect of their worship. فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ. Use your competitiveness to become better and to do good more than you did in the past and that you have done in your own life. And if you compete with each other for what is good, you start out competitive. But you will end up, by virtue of doing it for God, gradually no longer competing against each other, but rather competing against your own previous best. And once you move away from competing against your neighbor and you begin to move towards competing against your previous best, now you are out of the rat race. If I'm competing for good things with my neighbor, I'm still in the rat race. It's a better rat race than if you are competing to have more money. Competing to have more money is where you're working in a landfill. It's hard labor and it's also unclean and unpleasant. But if you are a laborer in a luxury store, you're selling expensive perfumes and colognes, you're still a laborer. But at least it's not filthy and it's not unpleasant. So if I'm competing to be richer than you, or I'm competing to be more powerful than you, I'm in a rat race, but it's in the landfill. I'm getting dirty, I'm contaminated, and I am living in filth and squalor. I might not realize it. If I compete with you to give a bigger donation to a masjid, to say that you finished the Quran once in the month of Ramadan, but I was able to finish it 3 times. Now, I'm still a laborer, and I'm still earning a paycheck, making somebody else rich. But rather than earning a paycheck, shoveling filth in the landfill, I am stocking shelves in the luxury shop. It's better than that, but it's still not building anything for myself. Those luxury goods that, when I stock the shelf, I'm holding thousands of dollars in my hand, it's not mine. So as a cashier, maybe thousands of dollars are passing through my hands every day, but I'm still taking $15 an hour, or maybe $15,000, but not anything substantial. It's just a minor leftover goods of somebody else's empire. But once I come into that luxury store, now I'm around material wealth. And if I want to become wealthy, I'm more likely to see people who are wealthy and learn from them and have a shot at becoming wealthy myself when I'm in that environment compared to when I'm working in the landfill shoveling filth. But I'm not wealthy if I'm a cashier. Once I come in that environment, I now am exposed to the source and the people who have wealth. That example is also true for spiritual realities. Many people, when they look at these verses, they say that, well, if I'm competing, isn't it still a rat race? Why would the Quran say, فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ? This is true. But there is a difference in where you are holding that race and what kind of environment you have. You can work in a luxury store from your first job until your old age and never become wealthy. But if you have initiative and the intention, then that is a better springboard than some place where you are not exposed to wealth and the wealthy at all. Now, that's not my point. My point is to say that when it comes to our spiritual lives, the same thing is true. If I am competing for this world, then أَلْهَاكُمُ التَّكَاثُرْ حَتَّى زُرْتُمُ الْمَقَابِرِ is true. I'm going to want more and more, and I'm going to feel confident and happy, and I'm going to have self-esteem when I have much, and I'm going to feel like nobody when I have nothing. Or I might think people who have nothing are nobody. Or I might think that people who have something are somebody. Until حَتَّى زُرْتُمُ الْمَقَابِرِ. Until I learn that these superficial possessions are not even yours, and they don't define you and they don't benefit you. If I come now to my religious life, if I'm competing to pray more than you, if I'm competing to give more time or give more money than you, I've now entered into that luxury store. I am a cashier, and I'm still perhaps earning just a little bit more than minimum wage. Even a generous salary with commissions, it's still minimum wage compared to the infinite wealth that Allah has created within the spiritual universe. I'm still earning something minimal. But now I'm in a more wholesome environment. The first step is for me to stop saying, I gave more than so-and-so. I read more Quran than so-and-so. I volunteered more than so-and-so. And start saying, Alhamdulillah, I was able to do more than I did in the past. And as I begin to see that I have the capacity to do more than I did in the past, now see, this is what happens when you are tired. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Those curtains of darkness and then the curtains of light, they begin to peel away. And you become sincere. And sincerity is that I'm not competing against you, and I'm not even competing against my own previous record yesterday. But rather, I am competing against the limitations of my life and my strength and my energy and these breaths that God has given me to come as close to God as I am able to come. But first I have to come out of the filth into that well-lit, bright, wholesome environment. Once I come into that wholesome environment, I can still live according to the logic of the rat race, or I can now open my eyes and my horizon towards a far more sublime competition. Not even against myself, but against time and against my base desires to come close to God. So, just like that aesthetic sense and the desire for beauty is divine, the desire for acquisitiveness is also a divine impulse. But not everybody is able to discover God through their competitiveness and their acquisitiveness. Many people, they get lost in acquiring and hoarding something that will not benefit them and may even harm them. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Now, that's an important spiritual lesson, but to return to the initial question, why is it that people who have much are often hopeless? Until you have something, you can't realize that it doesn't have the potential that you thought it has. When I don't have something, then I project my hopes onto it. And I think when I am renting, that if I had my own house, then I would be able to be at peace. I'd be able to sleep at night. My upstairs neighbor is not going to wake me up because they're exercising too early in the morning, or they're walking too heavily on the floor above or on the floor beneath me. Then when I get my own house, I say that, it's nice to have my own house, but it's a little cramped, doesn't have a garage, it doesn't have something else that I need. And in the winter, I say that, if I didn't have to scrape the snow off my car every day, if it were parked in a garage, then I would be in a much better position. Until you get something, you're not going to realize that it doesn't bring happiness. So one reason why, although it might seem counterintuitive, it might seem ironic, the people who have everything are the most hopeless is because the others are still in that false impression that maybe if I just had more, it would give me purpose and meaning and satisfaction in my life. But once you have the house, and you're not going to go hungry, and you can buy or acquire anything that you might want, now you realize that going and visiting that place, seeing that very desirable site, staying in that very luxurious hotel, having that wonderful experience, getting to know that person, acquiring that object, getting that position of power or influence, none of it meets my most fundamental needs. And as soon as I get one material thing, I realize that there is some other material thing that I don't have. Even the greatest emperors in the world, the Fir'auns and the Numruds and the Bakhtun Nasrs and the others of the world, they never said, what, my empire is big enough. Aurangzeb destroyed an empire trying to conquer the Deccan when his empire had 25% of the GDP of the entire world. That was still greater than the GDP of all of Europe after the beginning of not the Industrial Revolution, but the beginning of the Enlightenment and the discoveries and advancements that led to an industrial revolution. You can throw it all away, not to minimize the other factors that caused that decline, but that is the nature of acquisitiveness. If I am to look at this world, then having Bengal and having Awadh and having Delhi and having Lahore, all the way up to Kabul is not going to be enough. What is there in the Dhaka? And I might throw away the wealthiest and most prosperous empire for that acquisitiveness. When you have everything, then you realize that having everything in this world is no different than having nothing, because it doesn't belong to you. On your deathbed, whether you be a beggar on the street of Delhi, or you be the empire head ruling from the throne, you would say, Halaka anni sultaniya. On the deathbed, whatever authority I had, whatever influence I had, it will come to an end. If you go through that journey, then you will experience the excitement of getting something new, and then the disappointment of getting something new. There is just sometimes a few moments between the two. This is exactly what I need, and the only thing that I need. And God, I will never ask you for anything again. God, I know you gave me this, but there's one more thing I need to ask. And this will be my final request. But is it ever going to be the final request? So the point is that when we live in this world, there will never be an end to our needs. If you see people who do not believe in God, and they seem satisfied with their life and they seem happy, then that is not false, because their not believing is just the surface. They still breathe. They still eat. They still drink. If they are educated and if they are intelligent, then they still make good decisions for their careers, for their families, for their health. They don't overindulge in junk food. If they do consume alcoholic beverages because they don't know the prohibition of Sharia, they don't do so in excess, even if they are not a believer. Why? Because that is part of the religion that God has placed within our existence. Then, if you are religious, you know that true moderation is to avoid certain things altogether. So it's not don't get drunk, but it's don't drink even a sip. But don't get drunk is something that you shouldn't need God's revelation to tell you. That's God's creation, or His revelation, which has come within your very existence. So those people, they will also have a decent life. But what did we say? If you scratch beneath the surface, then it may not have staying power. Because they don't wake up and think, why am I here? They don't remind themselves throughout their day to wonder and to then seek an answer for the question of the reason for their existence. So you will see that although you don't need God's command to know that love is a beautiful thing and you should love your families, the family system will break down. And the devotion and sincerity to parents, spouses, children, relatives will become diluted and then will sometimes become forgotten. Their life, my life, their choices, my choices. What do I have to do with them? Because it is not rooted, it is not nurtured, it is not irrigated, and therefore, if the weather is good, it will survive. But if there is a dry spell, that plant will wither because it hasn't built a strength and it doesn't have a reservoir to protect it in difficulty. And if a non-believing society goes through crisis, then you will see what happens and what evils result. Sometimes we fear for the society that we live in and the direction that it is taking. But we don't have to wait. You can look at history. the crises that have come in many parts of the believing world are far more severe than the crises that came to Europe after World War I. Why is it that slight shock, a little bit of inflation, even before hyperinflation, even before the grave tragedies, resulted in fascism, resulted in unspeakable horrors? It was that lack of a reservoir of religion. As long as the wealth is coming in from the colonies, then yes, you have a fitrah, I have a fitrah. We don't need God to live according to the fitrah. Our life will lack a certain refinement. It will lack that extra 20%, 30%, that part of religion that you can only get from revelation. But it's not going to be very visible because everybody will be living according to their fitrah. The true difference comes when there is a crisis in my individual life or in my societal life. In society, when there is a crisis and you don't have God, then you see these evils of xenophobia and fascism and so many other forms of extremism. And in the individual life, when I don't have God and there is a crisis, whether the crisis comes during my life or whether it comes on the deathbed or when it comes just the moment after death, then you will find a crisis of my mental health, and people have midlife crises, and now midlife crises are coming earlier and earlier, so the midlife lifespans are getting longer. But the midlife crisis that people used to have in their 40s is sometimes coming in the 30s, sometimes coming in the 20s. And it's not funny, it's a tragedy. Sometimes 13, 14, 15 suicidal thoughts. What society brings people who haven't seen their family killed in front of their eyes, who haven't seen any kind of true calamity, and are not going to go without a roof over their heads and are not going to go without the food they need to sleep, to have suicidal thoughts. A person at the peak of their physical, mental strength, on the upward trajectory in their life. They don't wake up and see a new wrinkle. They don't wake up and see a new white hair in their head. They don't wake up and realize that now their joints are no longer going to support them. Why do people at that age have a crisis as severe as a midlife crisis for somebody who is now aging and on the downhill? That is what happens when you take God away from a society. Everything can be good, but it's all there just on the surface. So once again, purpose and meaning in life, superficially, it comes even without God because it is there within our fitrah. But in a true sense, and especially at times of crisis, it can only come through God and because of the insight and wisdom that comes from God. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. I want to just mention one example, and this is perhaps the most powerful example that I can imagine, at least in the limited amount of history that I have studied. You had a civil war in this country. It used to be that there was the North and the South. But now, even if you go to many places of the historical North, they're part of the Confederacy. I don't know how is Western Massachusetts if you come away from the city. I grew up in Western New York. New York is solid blue on the federal level. But the town that I grew up in, which was very welcoming of Muslims. I was the only Muslim in my grade, and whenever we would go on a field trip, everybody else would be jealous of the restrictions that I had. Because on the field trip, they would get pepperoni pizza, and the teachers would come to me and say, "Are you allowed to have fish? Can we bring you fish?" And so I would be sharing my halal food with my friends because they just got the normal food, special attention. But now when I visit that same town, you wouldn't recognize that openness, that friendliness. I'm not talking about 50 years ago. I'm talking about 30 years ago. It's become a completely different place where a person looking different, dressing different, is an alien, maybe not even human, not worthy not only of living in this country, but not even living in their own country. Sometimes the animosity is not even go back to where you came from, but rather, why do you even exist? If you talk to some of these people filled with hatred. But if you look at that confederacy, even in its historical area, has that wound healed even today? The war ended in 1865. More than 150 years ago. Nobody alive today was part of that battle. Their parents were not alive. Their grandparents were not alive. Their grandparents' parents were not alive. And yet, the fault lines are still there. Go to Europe and take a look at the geography of Europe from this perspective. What kinds of battles are still being fought over tens of kilometers of distance, and cultures that, there's a term that I think Muslims need to revive. Today we speak of the West and the East, but how did our grandparents know of the West? They didn't speak of the West. There was a term, Farangi. Some of you grew up perhaps using it, or maybe you heard it. That term needs to be revived. In our historical memory, in Arabic, it was Firanj or Ifranj. In Persian and in Urdu and in Turkish, it was Farangi. That comes from Frankish. And it means that undifferentiated mass of semi-civilized people who live beyond the Roman sphere of influence. Now, I'm not speaking of this in a prejudiced manner or in a chauvinistic manner. This is the historical understanding. When a Muslim said Farangi originally, it was those people who are tribal and they're recently accepted Christianity, but it's not the Orthodox Christianity that has a high culture and a tradition. It's something else. So it was a term of derision. Later on, as Farang became wealthy, it became a term of both derision and some admiration, grudging admiration, that they have a lot of wealth and they have strong armies, but I'm not still quite sure if they are civilized. That term, without the chauvinism, is a term that we need to revive. Because our dispute as Muslims is not with West or with East. It is with exactly the cultural values that Farangism, if I want to make an English term, historically represented. Not tied to any great civilization, not tied to any great religious tradition, but rather a society whose values are material and of this world. Their ideals are of this world. And that value system is something that we should look on with derision. Not to be chauvinistic against a person, but to be chauvinistic against a worldview that dehumanizes others and that takes away the sanctity of nature and creation. that has caused so much suffering and degradation within human society. This is a term that we need to revise so that we realize that our fight is not with geography, nor is it with a civilization, but rather with an anti-civilization. The degradation of the highest human ideals to a purely material existence, where empiricism and science becomes the extent of our imagination and our hope. So the reason why hope is lost in this society is because of Farangism. The reason why hope is lost is because the ideals that animated even classical civilizations, even non-Muslim civilizations, have been cheapened and turned into a caricature, a cartoon. They have been commercialized and commodified into simply a means for human aggrandizement that kills hope within society. When it comes to the individual, you have two choices. Distract yourself with material good, and then you might be able to live. You might need medicine, and you might need pharmacological help, but you will be able to survive. Or open your eyes and see the reality, and then you cannot but lose hope. So those people who have some hope, it's because they've blinded themselves to the reality of the society and the world that we have created and that we are living in. Hope is lost not as an outcome, but as a natural result of the society that we live in. And it is an answer to that that the Quran tells us what is the source of hope. And that is, inshallah, what we will continue to talk about in the next two majalis. But just to set the stage and the foundation, not just to describe the problem, but the manner of the solution. Inna alladhina amanu. Those who believe. Walladhina hajaru, and those who migrate. Wajahadu fi sabilillah, and they struggle in the way of Allah. Ulaika yarjuna rahmatallah. They are the ones who have hope, and hope in the mercy of Allah. Hope is not an outcome of your life, but rather it is a choice. Because Iman is a choice, Hijrat is a choice, Jihad is a choice. You do not have hope or lose hope as a result of the circumstances imposed upon you. You have hope or you lose hope as a result of the choices and the decisions that you make. In any circumstances, even the worst ones, you can have hope if you choose to. And you can lose hope in the best of circumstances if you choose to. So this verse tells us what is the basis of hope. أُولَٰئِكَ يَرْجُونَ رَحْمَةَ اللَّهِ. And inshallah, that is what we will speak about in the coming majalis. But in this month of Safar, there are 3 martyrdoms that we remember. One is the martyrdom of our 8th Imam, according to some on the 14th of the month of Safar, or the 17th of the month of Safar, or on the last day of the month of Safar. And there is one opinion that it is in the month of Dhul Qa'dah. There are different opinions. One is the death of our beloved Prophet Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wa. And one is the martyrdom of our second Imam, Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba alayhi salatu wassalam. Inshallah, we will remember the life and the death of Prophet Muhammad and Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba as we come closer to the date of their death, the 28th of Safar. But because the death of Imam Rida may have been in the previous week, if we accept the narration of the 17th of Safar, or it may be in the end of Safar, according to the different narrations among ulama. I would like today to speak briefly about the martyrdom of Imam Rida, because it is very closely tied to hope. I mentioned that people have false hopes, and then when their hopes are lost, then they become despondent and they go through a crisis. And that can happen for an individual and it can happen for a society. Many people at the height of oppression, their hope is that if the tyrant goes, then things will be good. They don't see that tyranny is a system, not an individual. They wait for an election, and they put their hopes and dreams in a political candidate that doesn't have the power, and even if they have the power, they don't have the desire or the insight to solve the problems that exist. This was what happened in the time of Imam Rida. There was rebellions by lovers of Ahlul Bayt in every corner of the Abbasid kingdom. This is why Ma'mun, the caliph, said that I want to make Imam Rida the heir apparent, because he was facing political pressure from the masses who had a love for Ahlul Bayt, but they didn't have insight that the problem is not just who is the caliph, the problem is in the entire culture and expectation of society. So they rebelled, trying to topple Harun. And then after Harun, Ma'mun. Ma'mun said that I have a strategy. I will make Imam Rida my heir apparent. And then people will say he has come over to my side. One of two things will happen. Either people will lose hope in Imam Rida, and then I win. Or people will follow Imam Rida and they will enter my camp, and I will win. What is the risk? That if people put their hope in something and lose hope, then they will become despondent. This is where you can see the miraculous wisdom of Imam Rida, that right from that first step, he gave people an indication of the reality of what Ma'mun wants. He said, I don't want your offer of being the heir apparent. Ma'mun says that I'm giving it to you on a gold platter. And the Imam says that I have no desire of it. The minister of Ma'mun says that, remember, the Abbasid kingdom was the wealthiest and biggest kingdom of the world at that time, from Europe and Africa all the way to the border of China. The minister of Ma'mun says that I never saw the Khilafat so worthless as on that day, where the Caliph, the king of the world, says, take it. And the Imam says, I don't want it. And then the Caliph threatened the Imam. And the Imam says, I will take it on my conditions, that I will not appoint, and I will not remove, and I will not decide, and I will not have any say in government decisions to tell people that this is not the source of salvation, and this is not the solution to the problems and the injustices that they see within society. To moderate and regulate, and to convey people's hopes to where they should lie, so that neither do we place hope in something false, nor do we become despondent when those false dreams burst. And such was the wisdom of the Imam, that Ma'mun realized that the love of the people for Imam Rida was greater than the love that they had for him or his government, or the fear that they had of him and his power. He thought that he would either weaken or co-opt the followers of the Imam. And what he found is that the Imam was winning over even his own soldiers and courtiers and followers. And so now he said that I cannot let Imam Rida survive. We don't always associate Imam Rida with tragedy. But there are two Imams who were gharib. One is Imam Hussein, and one is Imam Rida. And in some ways, the ghurba of Imam Rida, the tragedy of Imam Rida is unique. Nothing compares to Karbala. But when Imam Hussein was going to the battlefield, he bid farewell to Zainab. He bid farewell to Sakina. He bid farewell to Kulthum. He bid farewell to Imam Sajjad. He was not alone, even if he was surrounded by his enemy. And Ahlul Bayt had each other. But Imam Rida is called Ya Gharib al-Ghuraba because he was alone, with not even his own son Imam Jawad in his presence. In Mar, far away. And then in what is known today as Mashhad and was known then as Tus. Imam Rida was alone with a caliph who wished to kill him, but did not wish people even to know what became of their Imam. It is a tragedy for an Imam to be martyred. But it is even more of a tragedy, not for their body to be martyred, but for a government to claim that the Imam was my friend. And therefore my injustice is associated with this pure person from the household of the Prophet. If you want to know the loneliness of Imam Rida alayhi salam, then know that right after the death of Karbala, the defeat of Yazid began because he could not hide his crime. But after the martyrdom of Imam Rida, the first person to wear black and to say that I have suffered a loss was the very person who killed Imam Rida. And many people thought that Imam Rida, he was mourned and honored by those who extinguished his life and tried to extinguish his teachers. So some biographers wrote, this is the tragedy of Imam Rida, that he ate too many grapes, na'udhu billah, and because he ate too much, it caused him to become sick and he died. Imam Rida was ma'soom. He never overate in his life. Those grapes had been poisoned by the government. And because of that poison Ma'mun had put in the grapes, Imam Rida alayhi salam's body now began to go through the suffering of death. And time again, as the poison spread through his body, weakness came over the Imam. He turned his attention towards Medina and he gave his greetings and his salam to his grandfather Rasulullah. Oh my grandfather, oh the messenger of Allah, when I left Medina, I bid you a farewell salam because I knew that on this journey I would not come back. But oh my grandfather, my heart is in Medina. I wish to be back in your presence and in your company. This tyrant has poisoned me, and now I am leaving this world, and my heir My young son, Imam Jawad, is far away from me. And in his final moments, Imam Rida may have turned his attention towards the direction of Karbala and said, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Oh, my grandfather, Imam Hussein, from one gharib far away from his home to another gharib far away from his home and his loved ones. I send my salam as I die far away from my home, far away from my family. Oh, my grandfather, Imam Hussein, although I have been poisoned, I still am not on the sand of Karbala. I am not surrounded by enemies with their drawn sword. Shimr is not waiting for me to put my head on the ground so that he can come and raise my head on a spear. The salam of Imam Rida and all of Ahlul Bayt on Imam Hussein at the moment of their death. When Imam Rida died, Allah repeated a miracle that He gave to Imam Hussein. These are our true Gharib Imams. These are our two Imams who were separated from their loved ones. When Imam Hussein was martyred, then although Imam Zainul Abidin was a captive, and although he was in chains, Allah miraculously brought Imam Zainul Abidin from the dungeon of Kufa to bury the body of his father on the land of Karbala. And when Imam Rida breathed his last, although Imam Jawad was a young boy of 8 years of age in Medina, Allah miraculously brought Imam Jawad to the land of Tus so that the final funeral and rites of our Ma'soom Imam could be performed by his heir, the next Imam. As Imam Jawad buried his father, I can only imagine that he had in his mind the image of Imam Zainul Abidin, still weak with fever, still with a rope around his neck and with chains in his hands and in his feet, digging a grave for Imam Hussein and placing the body of Imam Hussein in that grave and saying that, oh Allah, this was your appointed Imam. Look at what your Ummah did and how I am returning your Imam to you. Imam Jawad returned Imam Rida to his creator, and then he mourned the loss of the Hujjah and the authority of Allah for humanity. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. ماتم حسين.
Allahumma